Okay, so welcome back to the Veterinary Technician online review course. Continuing on with the very last PowerPoint for 2.1, which is basically the discussion of the types of tissue found within the body. And we've already talked about epithelial, connective, and now we're going to be talking about muscle tissue specifically. This is the slide that we've seen in all the other PowerPoints for 2.1, just to explain to you there's 4 different types of tissue found within the body. We've already talked about epithelial tissue. We've already talked about connective tissue. This one we're going to talk about muscle tissue, and we're going to be skipping the nervous tissue within this lecture because the nervous tissue and its function will be covered in another module. Again, this repeated slide just to show you the 4 different types of animal tissues and each one of its subcategories. So in the connective tissue, we talked about all of these different 4 types of connective tissue. And in the epithelial lecture, we talked about all of these components of epithelial tissue. And then during the muscular PowerPoint, which is this one, we'll be talking about these 3 types of muscle tissue. So muscle tissue is composed of 2 different types of fibers, actin and myosin, and that's what makes up a muscle. There's 3 different types of muscle tissue. These 3 different types are skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Starting off with skeletal muscle can also be called striated muscle, and once you see a picture of it, you can see why it's called that. They're large cells that contain hundreds of nuclei in mitochondria, whereas a lot of cells that we've discussed have one single nucleus, right? These skeletal muscle cells have hundreds of nuclei, usually controlled through conscious effort, okay? And this is what's going to help you be able to understand these 3 different categories of muscle tissues. The skeletal muscle tissue is under voluntary control. Skeletal muscles are striated, and skeletal muscle cells are bundles of fibers held together by loose connective tissue. We talked about that loose connective tissue in the connective tissue PowerPoint, remember. The collagen fibers that surround the cells merge with collagen fibers within fibers in tendons. Smooth muscle. It's composed of small spindle-shaped cells that lack striation. Remember, the skeletal muscle cells that we were talking about were striated. These ones aren't. Muscle contractions cannot be consciously controlled. Again, unlike your skeletal muscles that help control your skeletal system, right? If I want to raise my arm, I use my skeletal muscles and I have voluntary control of that. These smooth muscles are completely involuntary. So these non-striated cells are under involuntary control. These can be found in hollow organs such as endocrine glands and along the respiratory tract. Again, we don't control these. Responsible for peristalsis in our gastrointestinal tract, okay, that muscle movement that pushes food down into our GI, peristalsis, that is smooth muscle. We don't control that. Constriction of blood vessels, so vasoconstriction and vasodilation, we don't control that. Our nervous system does, but it's under involuntary control, and the emptying of our urinary bladder as well. And the last type of muscle here is cardiac muscle. And guess where cardiac muscle is found? In the heart, right? Contains specialized pacemaker cells that supply signals for heart to contract at regular intervals. So the smooth muscle and the cardiac muscle are completely involuntary. We have no control over that. So the only one that we do control is the skeletal muscle. The cardiac muscle is completely involuntary, and it's also striated. The skeletal muscle is striated. The smooth muscle is not. It's spindle-shaped, but the cardiac muscle is striated as well. Cardiac muscle cells are connected to one another via intercalated discs, and we're going to talk what that is, but that's basically the connection that these cardiac muscle cells have to each other. So in this diagram here, you can see our cardiac muscles and what they look like and where they're found. So we can find that in the heart, and that's what they're going to look like. Our skeletal muscle cells, we're going to find it's hiding, hugging our skeletal system, and we have voluntary control of that, and that's what they're going to look like. They're striated. See, these two here have striations, these lines all the way through them. It's because they're striated cells. And then we have our smooth muscle cells, which is found in areas where we don't control, for example, digestion. We have no control over that, and that's where we're going to find smooth muscle cells, and they're spindle shaped, and that's what a spindle shape looks like as opposed to these two striated ones. Again, 3 types of muscle tissues, just to give you an idea within an animal what they would look like. Within the heart, we have our cardiac muscle. These are the muscle fibers here that you see, and these little dots would be the nuclei. And the intercalated disc that I was telling you that these cells are attached by are shown here by these dark stripes. If we look at our skeletal muscle, okay, that hugs our skeleton and that we voluntarily control, this is what it would look like here. So we're going to talk about what a sarcomere is in a second, but you can take a look at these fibers here. It's striated. And then down here within the GI, typically we'll see these smooth muscles, okay? And again, under involuntary control, you can see the nucleus and the spindle-shaped cells. And again, just to help really get this into your head, first type skeletal, that's what they look like there, and they're usually attached to bone or hug bone. Then the middle one here shows you smooth muscle. It's not striated, it's spindle shaped, and it can line the esophagus or various places down your GI and other places. And then we have our cardiac muscles there, which are strictly found in the heart.